0 to 60 can define a performance car, but it's the fastest 60 to 0 that's the aim of Tarok's brakes. From road cars to race cars, circuits, special stages, or the autostrada, nothing reduces speed like Tarok's brakes. Italy gave the world the art of Da Vinci and Michelangelo. Tarok's has given drivers the art of stopping. For more information and to acquire your own masterpiece, visit tarox.co.uk. Yes, it's me, Mike Stone, and this is the Backstreet Driver Podcast. It's the fastest, it's the friendliest, and it's for all the family. The Gas Shocks 116 Trophy and 120 Coupe Cup are the fastest growing race series in the UK, taking in 6 one-hour races and 8 sprints at all the top circuits. Visit 116trophy.com to find out more and get yourself behind the wheel. From a pot of tea to TT motorbikes. From a classic English breakfast to a full serving of classic cars. Bridge House Tea Rooms is the Northwest premier classic car meeting location for cars, bikes, tractors and owners clubs. So no matter what your automotive appetite might be, visit Bridge House Farm Tea Rooms on their Facebook page or call John and Alicia on 07980 444 221 for show details and to reserve your own table and parking space. I'm here at the Great British Car Journey. Whether we would call it a museum or not is hard to say. It's an homage to the British cars that you saw every day of every week, but now you don't see at all, really. Also, it's interactive. You can also come down and arrange to drive the cars that you grew up with, the cars that your dad drove. So, I'd like to introduce the man behind the Great British Car Journey, Richard Usher, to the Backstreet Driver Radio Show. Richard, welcome to the Backstreet Driver Radio Show.
Well, thank you very much, Mark.
How did all this come about?
Well, you pretty much summed it up in your introduction. I was offered about 7 or 8 years ago an Austin Maestro with 12,000 miles on the clock, and it suddenly occurred to me that I couldn't remember when I'd last seen an Austin Maestro. And sure enough, this car had got 12,000 miles on the clock, was pretty much like brand new. And I just got fascinated by the whole concept of the car having become a completely disposable item. So something made in millions just pretty much disappearing.
Yeah. Now, as I said, it's dedicated to the British cars. So, I mean, this car, over the years, as you walk around the museum, you walk through time. Just talk us from the reception, from the moment you walk in, where, of course, you're greeted by the famous Austin 7, the British car that put the British man and the British woman onto the British roads. But you then go through a whole evolution of time.
Yeah, well, I think the Austin and Morris are the sort of central plank of the story because they merged and became BMC and then they became British Leyland. And, to a whole generation, they were the great British car makers. And, they were interesting people, fantastic entrepreneurs who took colossal risks. So, yes, chapter 1 is about Austin because the 7 was this little seminal car that really did change the world and certainly changed the UK forever. And we follow that through with Morris, who obviously was very lucky to employ Alec Isigonis, who designed the Morris Minor for him. And then when the company merged and became BMC, he designed his most famous project, the Mini. Single-handedly, Isigonis was responsible for something like 9 million cars, none of which you see every day on the road now.
The Minis that you've got on display, well, to go to the Austin 7, you have some very famous Austin 7s, including one that only ever had one owner.
Yeah, we've tried to sort of go for the quirky cars. It's taken us 4 years to put this collection together. And we've gone out of our way to buy low mileage, original, if possible, one owner or family owned cars because they themselves have a story which we can narrate to you on the device while you're going around.
Yeah. And from the Austin 7s, the Minis, it's the last Mini Cooper ever built. all the way to one of the very first cars.
Yeah, we've got a 59 Mark 1, which, again, you'll know, the 59 cars are really sought after now because they were the start of the line. And we've got one of the very last cars built in 2000. And it just seems incredible to me that the Mini had that 41-year production run. The Metro was supposed to kill it off, but it never did. People just went on buying the Mini because it was such a great car. And we find people now, they come and drive the Mini because they've never driven a classic Mini, and they're just smitten.
It's like you said, there's an example of all the Mini Metros. And as we were talking when we were having a stroll around, the Metro was designed to, for the term, kill the Mini off. And the last thing it ever did was kill the Mini off. I think the Mini outlasted the Metro, didn't it?
It did. The Metro was killed off by BMW in 1997. And it was a bit of a shame, really, because they sort of blamed NCAP. And in fact, if you look at the NCAP ratings for most small cars in that period, they weren't doing terribly well. So I think it was more of an excuse. But so the Metro was killed off, and there really wasn't another small car in the BMC British Leyland range, apart from that dreadful thing that they imported from India very late on. So that was the end of small, so that was really the end of my story in terms of, the Austin 7 right the way through to the Metro. And of course they even took the Austin badge off it, which I think was the ultimate act of sacrilege. What would poor old Austin have thought to think that, his company was owned by a German company, was sold for £10. And they even took his name off the front of the cars.
Yeah. And of course, nowadays we have, people know this, the modern Mini, which in my opinion is anything but a modern Mini. It's just a name. They keep the name going, but that's all they do with it because it bears no resemblance to the Mini.
Well, of course, the thing with all these cars, is how light they are. And again, when you drive, a Hillman Avenger or a Vauxhall Viva, you're struck by the fact it hasn't got power steering, but it doesn't need it because
they're all lightweight.
The car only weighs 900 kilos, whereas, most modern hatchbacks weigh 1,500 kilos. So they need power steering and power brakes, and because they're sort of hulking all that lard around.
Well, the other thing, everybody wants their modern cars to go faster. So to go faster, you have to improve the suspension. You have to invariably put a bigger engine in. Which means you'll also need bigger brakes because it all weighs more.
Absolutely. That is absolutely true, and that's where, going back to the Mini, it's such a wonderful little car because I think from memory it weighs about 600 kilos. And, you just feel like you're in little rockets, even though it's only got, 40 horsepower.
Yeah. And you're probably not going as fast as you think you are unless you happen to be in a well-sorted Cooper.
I never thought I'd love Austin 7 so much. I've been lucky enough to own Lamborghinis and things like that. But my Austin 7 is absolutely my most favourite car. And that's got 16 brake horsepower. But it weighs 300 kilos. So, it's brisk enough. I wouldn't take it on a motorway. But
just out of interest, which Austin 7 do you own?
I own one of the very last ones made. And it's just a bog standard Austin 7 Opel, which was the two-seater drop head, so it was the cheapest car in the range. It was the first one you could buy for less than £100.
But talking about Austin and Morris, you mentioned earlier on, there's Vauxhall, there's Hillman, there's Singer, there's Riley, and a lot of these cars, for a lot of people, I dare say you'll have visitors here who've never actually heard of these cars.
Well, we spoke earlier about, the Roots empire, and, the Roots brothers really were a pair of incredible operators. And outside of BMC, they were, for a time, the biggest car retailers in the UK. They made their fortune selling cars. They were both Austin and Morris's best customer. And then they couldn't get enough cars, so they bought Hillman and Humber when they were going bust, and got into car manufacturing, which ultimately was their downfall because mass producing cars is a very risky business, isn't it? If you build a bad one, as BMC found out or British Leyland found out when they built the Allegro.
Yeah. But there's the Vauxhalls in there, there's the Singers, as I said, there's the Rileys, and one make or one mark a lot of people don't remember at all is Humber. Well, that was part of it all.
That was part of the Roots group as well. And Humber was this sort of big upmarket car that, again, Billy Roots, who could sell, coals to Newcastle, basically he was a fantastic networker. So he persuaded Churchill that he needed to have a Humber.
Yeah.
And in fact, Churchill had a Humber estate just to do his painting with. And there's a great story that actually Billy Roots went to see him and said, I'm awfully sorry, Mr. Churchill, but we're not making this big Humber estate any longer. And Churchill, well, Billy, it won't do. I need another one. I can't paint without my Humber. And so they scoured the country, found the most low mileage one they could find, completely rebuilt it and presented it to him. And that was a very Roots way of operating. So, Humber also got the Royal Shield. They were by Royal Ascent suppliers of cars to the royalty. And as you know, we've got, when you see those big Humbers, the Hawk and the Super Snipe, they're just magnificent big cars.
Because, when you see a lot of war films and things like that, be it actual genuine footage or films made in the 40s and the 50s, and Montgomery, they drove around in like Humber field cars, Humber staff cars.
Yes, well, I think I may be wrong. Of course, Alvis were the great tank engine makers, but Humber certainly sort of played their part in the war. I think 30% of all the bombers built in the war were built in Roots factories in Coventry. So, there was a strong... But, Humber was just a great big car that is now completely forgotten. And they did rot like crazy. And they're not worth a lot now. They're not sort of very fashionable.
Yeah.
And we're very lucky that we've got a Hillman Hunter that's masquerading as a Humber as well, which is a bit of an insult. But we've got this.
Yeah, that's the other thing you notice in here. Just sidetracking for a moment. The British Leyland, call it, built a car like the Farina Austin Cambridge. Then it came out as various other cars. It was still the same car, but by the addition of a Wolseley badge, get it right, Stone, and Riley, a lot of these cars lived on, or the names lived on, though the car they were on wasn't what it purported to be. The names still lived on. They were more or less trim specifications, weren't they?
Well, of course, it's famously called badge engineering.
Yeah.
And I think it was, a lot of it was because Austin and Morris never really properly merged. They needed stronger management, which they eventually got too late with Michael Edwards. But the Austin dealers and the Morris dealers thought they were a sort of completely different animal, and that was very difficult in terms of sales. Even in the 80s, it meant that the BMC dealer, the BL dealer, was just not as proficient as Ford and Vauxhall dealers, who were really beginning to get their act together in the fleet market. And so, it had a big knock-on effect. We talked earlier, I don't think the Maestro was a particularly hugely worse car than the Mark III Escort, but it didn't sell so well because they never cracked the fleet market with it.
No. It's just like you go back to like there was the Morris Mini and there was the Austin Mini.
Yes.
There was the Morris 1100. There was the Austin 1100.
And the MG 1100.
And the MG 1100.
And the Wolseley 1100.
Yeah. And back then, the dealers, were there a Morris dealer or was it an Austin dealer? Or did the one dealer sell the both? And then when the customer came in, the customer decided which one of the two names they wanted.
Well, I think it was just a bit of a mishmash. And again, it's a very good question, to which, to be honest, I don't know the actual answer, but the certainly was the customer was confused, and he wasn't confused if he went to a Ford garage because they sold Fords, and if they went to a Vauxhall garage with a brief exception of Opel, you had Vauxhall Opel, but that was it. Whereas, as you say, you turned up at an Austin garage, you could be met with a plethora of alternatives which were very much the same car.
Yeah. You then moved from into the 50s, the 60s. When you get into the 70s and 80s in the museum, you can see where Ford start to, shall we say, dominate the market because, as you said, they have very, very defined cars. You have the Fiestas, you have the Escorts, then the Cortina, then the Sierras, and the Granadas. They were very defined cars, weren't they? Were British Leyland, call it what you will, was still floundering about to a degree, wondering what it might make.
Well, I think the interesting statistic is that, British Leyland in the early 70s were making something like 22 different models in 50 plus factories, whereas Ford were making about 6, and they were mainly making them at Dagenham, although they obviously did open a factory and still got a factory in Merseyside. So, at the end of the day, this rationalisation was the death. There's this rumour that, Ford took a Mini apart and couldn't work out how they could sell it for the price. And there's no doubt that they weren't making a lot of money out of the Mini, so the Mini was this sort of enormous seller. They made over 5 million Minis. But sadly, they weren't making huge profits out of it. They were the sort of ultimate busy fools.
Yeah.
And in the mid-range cars, the bigger cars, you said, you mentioned the Farina-bodied, Austins and Morrises, which weren't bad cars, but they were pretty dated. And Ford and Vauxhall were just better at listening to the consumer and realizing that, they couldn't leave the Fiesta looking the same forever, and it's always interesting to me with the Vauxhall Astra. We talked about the Mark I Astra earlier, which was a crackingly good car.
Yeah.
But Vauxhall realized that actually that sort of angular styling dated quite quickly. So the Mark I Astra only ran for 4 years, and the Mark II looked completely different.
It was radically different.
Radically different car.
Like teardrop shape.
Whereas even the last Metros look very much like the Metro that came out in '81, some 16 years previously.
As we said, on the very last Metro stuck a Rover badge on it, but it was still a Metro.
I always feel sorry for Rover. I mean, to me, the Rover's a sort of ultimately devalued brand, because there were some wonderful Rovers. I like the SD1. I think the P6 Rovers are great. And then, at the very end, the Phoenix 4 put a Rover badge on something made where was it made? It was made in India.
They said they were made in India, and there were badges of Rover.
And even the Rover badge was made in Turkey.
But the other thing is, you walk through the museum, besides what you call the family cars and the rather nice saloon cars, there's the sports cars there. And you can see how the British motor industry knew what it was doing with sports cars and then didn't know what it was doing with sports cars.
it is interesting because, MG was fantastically successful after the war with things like the TC. We've got a little TC there. Then, of course, the MGA and the B. And these cars sold phenomenally well in America. And we talked earlier again about how the sad thing was that they never improved them. And to me, the ultimate irony with the MGB is the worst MGBs are the last ones made because they're slower. They handle less well. They
have awful interior. I'm terribly sorry.
Yeah, the interior, but it's also pretty much the same interior. So the heater controls never changed.
No.
Even now, I've got an MGB. I can never work out what those two
the two rotary switches that don't seem to, they turn, but they don't seem to have any effect.
Don't seem to do anything at all.
No.
Again, we talked earlier about the Mazda MX-5. I mean, the Mazda MX-5 is a great little car, but it's not revolutionary. It's just well engineered. You can put the hood up with one hand. I dread going out in my MGB on a day like today because, in fact, I wouldn't go out in it because I might have to put the hood up.
Yeah.
And that's going to break all my fingernails and it's going to flap all the way home because I can't do all the studs up.
Yes.
And to me, that, ultimately, we were brilliant at building brilliant cars, but we just weren't very good. The Germans are brilliant at the evolution, aren't they? They take...
Well, they get it right. They take an original design or an initial design and improve it in a way that their customers like the improvements.
Yeah.
British Leyland used to improve it, and everybody say, it's worse, is that?
It is. There's a classic picture that we looked at earlier of the inside of the Allegro, and then you look at the inside of the 1100 and think, well, I'd much rather be travelling in the 1100.
Yes.
It's much nicer inside.
It was a nicer car.
Yeah, it was just nicer inside. It was more roomy inside than the Allegro.
Yeah.
So what were they thinking? Replacing, a pretty little car designed by Pininfarina that had sold very, very well with a rather ugly car, with a hideous interior. I'm sorry to the Allegro owners that are listening, but to me, the Allegro, although I own 3 of them, is probably the most unforgivable car in the collection because it's just wrong.
Well, it does make you wonder who thought it was a good idea to launch a car with a square steering wheel or quartic steering wheel.
Well, the quartic steering wheel is one thing, but I just think, the interior is just shit.
The Van der Plas nice. You've got to admit the Van der Plas nice inside.
Is okay, and I think, again, I always look at those cars of that sort of 70s generation and the plastic door handles offend me because you get into the earlier cars. They've got nice chrome door handles that feel like they're going to stay on the door, whereas those plastic ones, even though they don't break, feel like they're going to break.
But they did give them a quilted effect to give them a luxury. A luxury. I mean, it can't be that bad. Lotus used to fit them to their cars as well.
Well, I think that was sort of desperation on Lotus's part.
But I mean, like we were saying, we have the Sunbeam in there that was the star of the Cary Grant and Grace Kelly film, To Catch a Thief. I mean, these cars were superbly... England could produce elegant cars.
Oh, I mean, we produce... the MGB, to me, in my mind, is an elegant car. It's a very, very pretty thing. And I think Pininfarina probably had a bit of a hand in that, to be fair. I mean, Pininfarina had a lot of influence. But yeah, I mean, a lot of those cars were very, very handsome, and particularly the sports cars. And we talked about TR7 earlier. TR7 gets a very bad press, but
even though it should technically have been an MG, it was destined to start with to be an MG.
Well, and you look at that day as a sort of rationalisation point, and you say, well, why were they doing the Triumph Spitfire and the MGB and the TR6? There were too many cars in the range competing for the same market, and somebody had to sit down ultimately and say, well, I mean, the Stag, I get a lot of stick because we have a Stag, but it's not on display. But the Stag was just a fundamentally weird car to do, wasn't it? A 4-seater drop head with.
Well, it wasn't fish nor fowl, really, was it? It was not a bad looking car, but it was just odd.
And then they put a totally bespoke engine in it, which wasn't very reliable. When they got a perfectly good 3.5 litre V8
yes.
engine, well, why did they spend all that money? And you look at the big Austin of the time, that big Austin 3 litre, which was just a sort of 1800, but made into rear wheel drive. And it's just a lot of work and investment for absolutely no hope of any real return.
No. And then you move into the end of the, would you call it the end of the British motor industry?
No, I mean,
there's a modern day McLaren there.
Yeah.
There's one of Elton John's Bentleys, but it's one of the Bentley built Bentleys, not one of the current crop.
No. Well, I think, we have to acknowledge that I tried to work out the other day who the biggest British-owned car manufacturer was, and I think it's probably Ginetta up in Leeds, because that is an entirely British-owned company, and they still make about 100 and something racing cars a year. But I'm struggling to find a car.
Well, we can't even turn around and there's a Morgan in there, and I have a soft spot because I own Morgans, but regrettably, Morgan aren't British anymore. They're owned by the Italians.
Caterham aren't British-owned. I think that's still owned by Mr. Fernandez. So, it's kind of, I think it's just the fact that we've lost that sort of Britishness, which it was inevitable to a large extent. But I mean, the French haven't lost that Frenchness. There's still an awful lot of French cars on the French roads, and even Italian cars. Although again, Fiat are now part of something even larger, aren't they?
I think it's all part of this Stellantis, which is very hard work to work out. It's a bit like a global dictatorship of the automotive industry. Whatever you buy, it's the same car. They'll just stick the appropriate badge.
I mean, we're celebrating many things, and I think one of the other things we are celebrating is these cars were inspirational. I mean, Austin designed the Austin 7.
Yeah.
Issigonis designed the Morris Minor. I didn't show you, actually. I'm sure you know this story, but the very early Morris Minors have actually got a gap in the front bumper.
Yes, were they to widen them.
And that was down to Issigonis walking in quite late in the day and deciding that the car needed to be wider.
Yeah.
So, and because he said it had got to be wider, it was wider.
Yes.
And the Mini the same. I mean, the early sketches for the Mini by Issigonis look very much like the finished thing. That it was completely his creation.
Yeah.
And that's really what changed. And I suppose, again, the Ford Escort was, I think, the creation of a very talented engineering team. And obviously once Issigonis had been hoofed out, we tried to do the same thing at British Leyland with conspicuous lack of success.
Yes.
And ultimately it was a sort of a management issue. I mean, Michael Edwards did a good job, sorting a lot of it out. But I think I never quite understand why Edwards didn't stay, because he was being paid a lot of money.
Yes.
And I think he was probably just exhausted after 5 years. He just like, I can't go on doing this any longer, because, he moved the TR7 production away from Liverpool. You had to put the whole plant back together in Coventry. And I think it was just an exhausting process. And
every Monday morning he must have dreaded type of thing.
I can't imagine he rushed to work on a Monday, because it was always going to be problematic. But he liked to fight, didn't he? So,
Now, when you get to the end of the Great British journey, I mean, you can now actually drive some of these cars. If somebody comes here, how do they go about arranging to drive the cars?
Well, we've been a bit lucky, really, because I came up with this thing called Drive Dad's Car, and I got a bit of flack from, was that a bit sexist? And it wasn't meant to be, because...
But I'm not just putting in that it's from an era when I grew up. My dad did the driving. My mother actually had a Mini, which was quite a common thing then. But the big car, of which my father had a whole selection of them, both English and foreign, My mother never drove.
No, I'm exactly the same. I mean, I'm in my 60s, and my father always drove the big car. My mum had her own car, which, to be fair, my father didn't drive very often.
No.
unless it was first in the queue and he needed to go somewhere. So anyway, going back to your question about drive dad's car. So I came up with this idea of drive dad's car. And it was, again, just this sort of realization, even driving my Maestro, which is an 89 Maestro, it felt like a car from another era.
Yes.
It didn't have power steering.
Well, they didn't have anything fitted to them to make driving easier.
No, they
you
didn't.
To drive them, you to get in, start them up and drive them.
Yeah, and even the Maestro, because it's got the venerable A-series engine, you still have to pull the choke out. There's a little warning light that's telling you. But on the flip side, I think ergonomically, the instrument binnacle on the Maestro is an absolute model of clarity. You look at the instruments, you know exactly what they're doing. I don't know about you, but I get into any modern car and I'm baffled by all the switches, which seem to be arranged in an even more random way than ever. I'm baffled by the number of stalks and what do they do.
And the fact that if you climb into some, you've a selection of 5 different, basically dashboards to go at.
Absolutely. I mean, the Mark 1 Astra we've talked about, I love the lights on the Mark 1 Astra because it has one light switch.
Yes.
You turn it one way, one click for side lights, 2 clicks for headlights. The dip beam is obviously on the left-hand stalk. And if you pull the switch out, the interior lights come on.
Yes.
Now, how clever is that? So that's the light switch then.
A lot of the cars in there, I don't know if you'll ever catch on, but there's a rotary lever that you rotate one way or the other, and the windows go up and down. People now all want electric windows and everything else.
Yes, everything's power assisted, isn't it? And of course, it all adds weight.
Yes.
Because you've got to have an engine to get the windows to go up and down. And because the windows now in modern cars are more curved than ever, it's much more difficult to engineer that. So, I mean, we're celebrating a more simple time. I think I say on a bit of narration somewhere, we're talking about an era when you played I Spy, not on an iPad.
Yes, you had a little book.
Yeah. You had a little book looking for, number plates or that sort of stuff. And the driving experience was the same. It was completely analog, and if you heard a clonk, it was a bad news because something was going to fall off.
So if somebody wants to come down and drive, how do they arrange to drive the car?
That's very easy. So you visit drivedadscar.com. And you can buy a voucher, which is valid for 12 months. And when you ring up, there's a selection of 30 cars. There's quite a decent selection. And of course, it's all the classic stuff. And we've tried to make sure that, most of the cars have either got an interesting history or they're special. So the Morris Minor is a Morris Minor Million. It's one of the 200.
Because you can tell those, it's like a lilac colour.
Yeah, they were all made in a lilac colour. And every Morris dealer in the country was sent one to celebrate the millionth Minor rolling off the line. So you have a Morris Minor Million that you can drive. You have a very nice Morris Minor convertible. Most of the Minis we've got are either historically interesting or they're special editions. And you go to Drive Dad's Car, decide how much money you want to spend, buy your voucher, ring us up, tell us when you're going to come and drive. It's mainly a weekend activity, yes, because the estate that we're on is quiet at the weekend, so we have a driving route around the estate.
So I was going to say, where do they get to drive?
Well, they drive around about a mile around these private roads. They have an instructor in with them, so if they forget to
I was just going to say, do they get a little lesson of some sort?
Yeah, they get told when to put the choke in and reminded that if they're driving an Austin 7, there are no brakes.
Yes.
And
it may go into gear, it may not.
It may not go into gear, and the clutch is either in or out.
Yes.
So yes, they get a briefing on how to drive the car, and at the top end of the scale, we have a Rolls Royce that they can drive, and a Bentley, and an XJS convertible, so they can drive some quite sort of proper stuff, sort of big engined, meaty British cars from an era. So we sort of cover the whole area. You can drive an Austin 7 and go right up to the 80s and drive, an Escort or a Cavalier or whatever car the memory triggers.
I mean, roughly, you don't mind me asking, what does it cost to drive this?
It starts at £49. So if you're driving a nice little ordinary Mini, you get 20 minutes in the car with your instructor. You probably do several miles, and that's a £49 trip.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can buy a film package, so all the cars have got cameras on.
Oh, right.
And if you want to buy the onboard footage of you, there's cameras pointing in all directions, so you get a multi-screen version of your classic ride.
So, as things, shall we say, start to open up, etc., what events are you, besides the museum and the drive down to Corn, are there any events planned?
Well, we've not got any sort of events, and we're very, very keen to talk to car clubs, but I am conscious of the fact, and I'm a member of a few myself, that the car club world has been shut down for about a year.
Yeah.
I haven't been on an Austin 7 running my Austin 7 now for the best part of 18 months. And what we're really keen to say to people is if you're a member of a group or a car club or whatever, do get in touch. Our last admission is at 4:00.
Yeah.
Normally, we're quite happy to stay open later than 4:00 if you're on a run at the weekend and you want to come and finish with us.
Yeah.
And similarly, if you want to come early, we open at 10. If you want to come at sort of 8:00 and have 2
You'll
hours
open up
before,
early.
we'll open up early. And yes, we would like to do some, something a bit akin to the scramble that goes on at Vista Heritage.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we're not on an airfield, so we don't have quite the luxury of being able to park thousands of cars. Although we do have a very nice field that we're looking at working on. So hopefully, as the summer goes on, as you see, we're right on the edge of the river. We've got a field.
I'm going to say it's in a. I mean, you're in the heart of Derbyshire. You're at Belper.
Well, we're actually, yes, we're sort of between Belper and Matlock. So we're the A6, which is the road that you can hear out there, is the old trunk road from Manchester to London, and we're right on the side of it. So we're very easy to find. We're very close to the M1. And so, but if you're coming on a classic car drive, we're right at the start of some really beautiful countryside. So
yeah. Richard Usher and the Great British Car Journey. Thank you very much for joining me on the Backstreet Driver radio show. It's been a pleasure chatting to you, and it's been a pleasure looking at cars that for want of a better term, I grew up with, that a lot of people have forgotten. The only downside to it is it rather reminds me of just how old I now am. But once again, Richard Usher, thanks very much for joining me on the Backstreet Driver radio show.
You're very welcome, Mark. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Rarely beaten on price, never beaten on service. Whether it's cars, bikes or commercials, Hoddy Tyres are the best in the business. And when it comes to tyre expertise and advice to supplying the correct tyres for your vehicle's specific requirements, nobody comes close to David Lakin and the Hoddy Tyres team. So give them a call on 01200 613 192 or visit the website at hoddytyres.co.uk.